An unknown heir appeared at the gates of Oakhaven Estate with yellowed documents and a family locket everyone believed lost. When matriarch Eleanor Vance saw him, her porcelain teacup shattered against the floor as she recognized in his eyes the same look as her late husband. Secrets buried for decades came to light, and the fate of the most powerful family in Seabrook changed forever in ways no one could imagine. A story of redemption, identity, and reconciliation spanning generations. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment from what part of the US you're watching. The dawn light filtered through the heavy damask curtains when Eleanor Vance received the letter that would change the destiny of Hopewell Estate forever. Her hands, marked by 65 years of life, trembled slightly as her eyes scanned the lines written in a script she hadn't seen in almost 3 decades. The paper, yellowed with age, emitted a faint scent of jasmine that instantly transported her to another time, a time when the estate's coffee plantations stretched like an emerald green carpet under the intense blue sky of the Florida coast, when laughter echoed in the red-tiled corridors and the future seemed as bright as the sun that bathed the fields each morning. "I am Gabriela Montero, daughter of Anthony," Eleanor read aloud, as if she needed to hear the words to believe them. "I have returned to Savannah to know my father's land and speak with you about matters concerning us both." The porcelain teacup she held slipped from her fingers, crashing against the terracotta floor and shattering into 1,000 pieces, just as her tranquil existence, built after so much effort, was about to crumble. Lucy, the faithful housekeeper who had served the family for over 4 decades, rushed in, alarmed by the clatter. "Are you all right, Mrs. Vance?" she asked, bending to gather the scattered fragments. Eleanor remained motionless, her gaze fixed on an invisible point beyond the windows overlooking the central garden. "Anthony had a daughter," she finally murmured, more to herself than to Lucy. "All these years, and I never knew of her existence." Lucy paused, holding the porcelain shards in her calloused palm. Her face, etched with wrinkles that told stories of decades in the service of the Vances, reflected a shadow of recognition that didn't go unnoticed by Eleanor. "Did you know?" Eleanor's question sounded more like a statement. The woman looked down, unable to meet her employer's inquisitive eyes. "There were rumors, ma'am, when Mr. Anthony traveled to New Orleans, it was said he visited a woman, but I never knew he had a child." Eleanor rose with the dignity that had always characterized her, smoothing the skirt of her dress as if that gesture could also order the whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Prepare the bougainvillea room," she ordered firmly, "and tell Matthew I need to see him immediately." As Lucy left, Eleanor looked at the letter again. A small family locket she believed lost accompanied the message, as irrefutable proof of the veracity of those words that shook the foundations of her world. At 65, Eleanor had faced adversity with the strength that characterized the women of her lineage. She had kept Hopewell Estate afloat after Anthony's sudden departure, transforming what was a traditional plantation into one of the most respected coffee producers in the region. Her 2 children, Matthew and Caroline, had grown up seeing in her an example of determination and resilience. But this news arrived at the most delicate moment. Just as the estate was preparing to celebrate its centennial and sign important commercial agreements with European markets, this woman, Gabriela, appeared, claiming a place in a family history that Eleanor had carefully rewritten for 30 years. From the corridor, she observed the fields stretching as far as the eye could see. The workers moved among the coffee plants like tiny ants, oblivious to the emotional earthquake shaking the big house. The chapel bell tolled 10 in the morning, and with each sound, Eleanor felt time accelerating, pushing her towards a meeting she had unconsciously feared for decades. "Mum," Matthew's deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "Lucy says it's urgent." Eleanor turned to face her son. At 40, Matthew was the spitting image of Anthony. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a piercing gaze, he had taken over the management of the estate's commercial side, while his sister Caroline oversaw production. Together, they had taken Hopewell Estate to new heights, fulfilling the dream that Anthony had barely begun to glimpse. "A letter has arrived," Eleanor said, handing him the paper. "Read it yourself." Matthew took the letter with curiosity. His expression changed as his eyes scanned each line, shifting from surprise to disbelief, and finally to restrained indignation. "This is absurd," he declared, returning the letter with a brusque gesture. Anyone can invent a story like this and claim to be part of the family. She's probably after money now that we're doing well. Eleanor took the locket, caressing its worn surface where the family crest remained clearly engraved. This locket belonged to your father. Your grandfather gave it to him when he turned 18. Anthony always carried it with him, until one day it simply disappeared. It was shortly before his last trip to New Orleans. A heavy silence settled between them. The unspoken words weighed more than the spoken ones. "We'll receive her," Eleanor finally announced. "We'll hear what she has to say, then we'll decide." "But Mom, the centennial is in less than 3 months. The Japanese are arriving next week to finalize the export agreement. We can't let a family scandal ruin everything." Eleanor looked at her son with the same determined expression she had shown 30 years ago when bankers tried to convince her to sell the estate after Anthony's departure. "If she's your father's daughter, she has the right to be heard," she declared firmly. "Commercial agreements can wait. The dignity and honor of this family cannot." Matthew knew that look. He knew there was no argument that could change her mind. He nodded resignedly and headed for the door. "I'll tell Caroline," he murmured. "She should know too." When she was alone again, Eleanor opened a small drawer in her desk. From it, she took a faded photograph, Anthony smiling with the New Orleans skyline as a backdrop. She had never understood why she kept that particular image, taken during one of his frequent business trips. Now, looking at it with new eyes, she wondered if the woman who had given birth to Gabriella had been a few feet away, outside the frame of that photograph. The bell rang again, marking the inexorable passage of time. Tomorrow, Gabriella Montero would arrive, and with her, truths that for 3 decades had remained buried under the weight of silence and distance. Eleanor put the photograph away, wiped away a furtive tear, and went out to the corridor. She had an estate to run and a past to confront. The morning Gabriella Montero first crossed the gates of Hopewell Estate, the sky over Savannah was an impossible blue, almost like a mocking welcome to the emotional hurricane about to unleash. At 28, Gabriella possessed the serene beauty of someone who has known both joy and sorrow. Her light brown skin, an inheritance from generations of Creole women, contrasted with amber eyes that, according to her late mother, were identical to Anthony Vance's. She wore her black hair in a simple braid and dressed with the understated elegance of someone who doesn't need to show off. The taxi dropped her off at the main entrance, where an imposing wrought iron gate displayed the intertwined initials of the Vance family. Gabriella paid the driver and paused for a moment, contemplating what for years had only existed in her mother's fragmented stories, the legendary Hopewell Estate, with its ochre walls and red tiles, its lush gardens, and the unmistakable aroma of freshly roasted coffee floating in the air. "Good morning," she greeted a worker passing by carrying sacks. "I'm looking for Mrs. Eleanor Vance." The man looked at her curiously, as if trying to place her in his mental catalogue of the estate's regular visitors. "Do you have an appointment, miss?" "Yes," Gabriella replied, nervously adjusting the strap of her bag where she kept the letter she had sent days before. "She's expecting me. I'm Gabriella Montero." The surname seemed to trigger some invisible spring. The worker nodded with an expression that mixed surprise and recognition. "Of course, Miss Montero. They'll take you to Mrs. Lucy." As they walked the cobblestone path to the main house, Gabriella absorbed every detail eagerly. The perfectly aligned coffee plants in the distance, the multicolored flowers bordering the paths, the sound of cicadas mingling with the workers' voices. All of that was part of a legacy that belonged to her by right of blood, but that until then had been denied to her by circumstance and silence. Lucy greeted her on the porch, with the cautious expression of someone who has witnessed too many family storms to be surprised. "Welcome to Hopewell Estate, miss," said the woman, studying her with a look that seemed to search for traces of Anthony in her features. "Mrs. Vance is waiting for you in the parlor." Crossing the threshold, Gabriella felt she was entering not just a house, but an unknown chapter of her own history. The family portraits adorning the walls seemed to observe her with the suspicion reserved for intruders. She immediately recognized her father in one of them, Anthony Vance, with his distinguished bearing and that smile she had inherited, according to her mother. Eleanor Vance waited, standing by the window, a slender figure enveloped in the dignity that only years and battles won can bestow. Beside her, a man and a woman whom Gabriella deduced were her children, watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. "Mrs. Vance," Gabriella greeted, advancing with a firm step. Thank you for receiving me. Eleanor contemplated her in silence for a few moments that seemed like an eternity. Her eyes, the same deep brown as Matthew's, scanned Gabriella's face as if seeking to confirm what the letter and the locket had already revealed. The resemblance is undeniable, she finally murmured, extending a hand that Gabriella clasped with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Welcome to Hopewell Estate, Gabriella. Allow me to introduce myself formally, the man intervened, stepping forward with a gesture that denoted both courtesy and caution. I'm Matthew Vance, general manager of the estate, and this is my sister, Caroline. Caroline, a woman in her mid-30s with her mother's elegant bearing, but with eyes that reflected a hard-won toughness, barely nodded in a distant greeting. Please have a seat, Eleanor indicated, pointing to the armchairs arranged around a low table, where Lucy had prepared coffee and cookies. We have much to talk about. Gabriella took a folder of carefully arranged documents from her bag, the birth certificate listing Anthony Vance as her father, photographs, handwritten letters exchanged between her parents, and finally, a diary her mother had kept during those years. My mother, Remedios Rodriguez, met Mr. Vance during one of his trips to New Orleans in 1994, Gabriella began, spreading the documents on the table. She worked as a guide at an art museum. Their relationship lasted almost 3 years, though it was always discreet. My mother understood the situation. She knew he had a family here. Eleanor took one of the photographs with trembling hands. It showed Anthony and a beautiful young woman with indigenous features, smiling in front of a colonial church. When she became pregnant, my mother didn't want to complicate his life, Gabriella continued. She decided not to inform him immediately. But when I was 6 months old, he found out during one of his visits. Matthew, who had been leafing through the letters with a skeptical expression, looked up. And what did my father do then, if it was really him? The hostility in his voice was palpable, but Gabriella maintained her composure. According to my mother, he was surprised but happy. He started visiting us more often, legally recognized me, although they agreed to keep it private, and promised to make sure we never lacked anything. Why are you appearing now? Caroline interrupted, in a tone that hinted at her distrust. Just when the estate is about to sign million-dollar contracts. Gabriella took a deep breath before answering. She expected this question. She had anticipated it during the long trip from New Orleans. My mother passed away 6 months ago. Among her belongings, I found these letters and the locket, along with instructions to seek them out only after her passing. She always respected the distance Mr. Vance wanted to maintain between his two families. I'm not looking for money or public recognition, if that's what worries you. I just wanted to meet you, to understand that other half of my origin. The ensuing silence was broken by Eleanor, who rose to personally serve the coffee, a gesture that surprised even her children. Coffee from our latest harvest, she explained as she filled Gabriella's cup. It won a gold medal at the Seattle International Exposition. That simple act, serving coffee with her own hands to the newcomer, was a more powerful statement than any word. It was the matriarch of the Vances recognizing, at least in that small gesture, the legitimacy of the visitor. Your father loved coffee, Eleanor continued, returning to her seat. He said a good cup could tell the story of the land where the beans had grown. Gabriella held the cup in her hands, inhaling the intense and complex aroma. My mother told me the same thing. Every time we drank coffee, she would say, "This is how your father's hands smelled." Something softened momentarily in Eleanor's expression, as if that coincidence had slightly cracked the wall of reserve she had built. What exactly do you expect from us, Gabriella? Matthew finally asked, leaning forward. Let's be clear from the beginning. I don't expect anything material, if that's what worries you, she replied, holding his gaze. I have my own life in New Orleans. I'm an agronomist specializing precisely in organic coffee cultivation. The irony of fate, I suppose. She smiled slightly before continuing. I just wanted to know this part of my history, see the place where my father built his life, perhaps understand why he could never integrate his two worlds. Caroline, who had been attentively observing Gabriella's every gesture, intervened in a more moderate tone. How long do you plan to stay in Savannah? I booked 2 weeks at an inn downtown. After that, it will depend on how things develop. Eleanor exchanged a look with Lucy, who remained discreetly near the door. There's no point in you staying at an inn when you have so much space here, the matriarch declared. Lucy has already prepared the bougainvillea room. You will stay at the estate during your visit. Surprise was reflected on Matthew and Caroline's faces. but neither dared to contradict their mother's decision. "That's very generous of you, Mrs. Vance," Gabriella replied, visibly moved. "But I wouldn't want to be a bother." "The Vances don't leave family at inns," Eleanor declared firmly, with no room for argument, regardless of the circumstances. Those words, spoken with the authority of someone who has spent decades running both an estate and the destinies of a family, sealed a tacit pact between the two women. It wasn't complete acceptance or reconciliation, but a beginning. A recognition that the bonds of blood, however complex, deserved at least the opportunity to be explored. "Matthew," Eleanor continued, "help Gabriella with her luggage and show her the estate. Caroline and I need to review the preparations for the Japanese visitors." As Matthew nodded resignedly and Gabriella thanked the hospitality again, neither could imagine how that decision would profoundly alter the course of events at Hopewell Estate. The family locket shone softly on the table, a silent symbol of a past returning to claim its place in the present. The first rays of sun barely filtered through the curtains of the bougainvillea room when Gabriella awoke, momentarily disoriented. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was, not in her small apartment in New Orleans, but at Hopewell Estate, surrounded by walls that had been silent witnesses to generations of Vances. She sat up slowly, enjoying the feel of the Egyptian cotton sheets against her skin. The room was a perfect blend of tradition and comfort, hand-carved mahogany furniture, an antique desk by the window, and, as a distinctive note, a vase overflowing with fresh bougainvilleas that gave the room its name. After dressing in comfortable clothes and braiding her hair in her usual style, Gabriella went out to the corridor. The estate was slowly coming to life. Some workers were already heading to the coffee plantations, while the kitchen staff prepared breakfast amidst aromas of cinnamon and chocolate. "Good morning, Miss Gabriella," Lucy greeted her, supervising the cleaning of the main parlor. "Did you sleep well?" "Perfectly, thank you," Gabriella replied with a sincere smile. "Do you know where I can find Mrs. Vance?" "The lady always gets up early. She'll be in her office reviewing production reports. But first you should have something to eat. The kitchen will prepare whatever you like." Gabriella thanked her and headed towards the kitchen, where she was greeted with barely disguised curiosity by the staff. Everyone seemed to be aware of her identity, and their glances ranged from suspicion to fascination. "What would you like for breakfast, miss?" asked an older woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Mercedes, the head cook. "Whatever is easiest, please. I wouldn't want to cause any trouble." "Green chilaquiles with fried eggs and refried beans," Mercedes suggested with a knowing smile. They were Mr. Anthony's favorites. That simple coincidence, discovering that she shared her father's culinary tastes, triggered a surge of emotion in Gabriella. It was those small details, those invisible connections, that she had come to Hopewell Estate to find. While having breakfast on the terrace, observing the imposing view of the coffee plantations stretching to the mountains, Gabriella noticed Caroline's presence, who was watching her from the entrance. "Good morning," Gabriella greeted her, gesturing for her to join her. "The view is truly impressive from here." Caroline hesitated for a moment before approaching. She was wearing practical attire, jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved shirt that protected her from the sun, the unofficial uniform of someone who works in the field daily. "My grandfather chose this place precisely for the view," she commented, finally accepting the invitation. "He said that good coffee needs inspiration, as well as fertile land." "It seems that the talent for memorable phrases runs in the family," Gabriella smiled. "My mother always quoted Mr. Anthony." Caroline studied her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Of the two siblings, she was the one who physically resembled Eleanor the most, the same delicate bone structure, the same piercing eyes, capable of intimidating with a single glance. "Are you really an agronomist specializing in coffee?" she asked abruptly, as if that coincidence was too convenient to be true. "Specializing in organic crops and origin certification," Gabriella clarified, showing no offense at the distrust. "I work as a consultant for several cooperatives in New Orleans." "It's just that it seems curious," Caroline continued, pouring coffee from the coffee maker on the table. "Of all the possible professions, I don't believe in coincidences. My mother raised me among botany books and stories about how my father could identify the origin of a bean just by its aroma. I suppose some passions are carried in the blood." A silence settled between them as they contemplated the same horizon from such different perspectives. For Caroline, those coffee plantations represented her inheritance, the fruit of generations of work. For Gabriella, they were the symbol of a connection that had been denied to her for years. "We're facing a problem with part of the plantation," Caroline finally said, as if she had made a decision after a long internal deliberation. "A fungus is affecting the young plants in the east sector. We've tried several treatments, but nothing seems to work completely." Gabriella immediately understood the meaning of those words. It wasn't a simple conversation about agriculture, it was a test, an opportunity to demonstrate both her professional expertise and the legitimacy of her connection to the estate. Leaf rust? Or something more unusual? We started thinking it was leaf rust, but now we think it could be fusarium. The symptoms aren't typical. "Would you allow me to see the affected plants?" Gabriella asked, her professional interest genuinely aroused. "In New Orleans, we've developed some organic methods that have proven effective against resistant variants." Caroline nodded, and the gesture seemed to slightly ease the tension between them. "Finish your breakfast. I'll take you there afterwards." As they walked the paths winding among the coffee plants, Gabriella absorbed every detail with the eyes of both a professional and a daughter discovering her father's legacy. Caroline, for her part, explained with evident pride the cultivation methods implemented at Hopewell Estate, the history of each variety, and the expansion plans. "This is the affected sector," she finally indicated, stopping in front of an area where the coffee bushes showed evident signs of disease. "It started about 2 months ago, right after the late rains." Gabriella approached the plants, carefully examining the leaves and stems. Her expert hands ran over the surfaces with the delicacy of someone who deeply respects what they touch. "It's not fusarium," she concluded after several minutes of inspection. "It's phoma, a less common but equally destructive fungal disease. The error in diagnosis would explain why the treatments haven't worked." Caroline's expression reflected surprise and nascent professional respect. "Are you sure? None of our technicians identified it as such." "Quite sure. In New Orleans, we had a similar outbreak 2 years ago. The good news is that it can be controlled with organic methods that won't affect the certification of your crops." Over the next hour, Gabriella explained in detail the treatment she recommended, a combination of natural extracts and management practices that had proven effective. The shared experience created an unexpected bridge between the two women, a common ground where initial distrust gradually gave way to mutual respect. "We'll implement your proposal in a test section," Caroline decided as they returned to the main house. "If it works, we'll extend it to the rest of the affected area." "That's the most prudent thing to do," Gabriella agreed. "I'll be happy to supervise the process during my stay." Upon arriving at the house, they found Matthew in the midst of a discussion with a group of Japanese visitors. The introductions were brief and formal, but Gabriella didn't miss the curious glances of the businessman when Matthew introduced her simply as an agronomist consultant. "Mr. Yamamoto and Mr. Tanaka represent one of the most important gourmet coffee import consortiums in Japan," Matthew explained when the visitors retired to refresh themselves. "The agreement we're negotiating could mean a 40% increase in our exports." "That's excellent news," Gabriella commented. "The Japanese market particularly values organic crops and designations of origin." Matthew looked at her with renewed interest. "Do you have experience in Asian markets?" "Some. One of my clients in New Orleans exports exclusively to Japan and South Korea. I could share some observations if you're interested." Before Matthew could respond, Eleanor appeared on the porch. Her serious expression indicated concern. "Matthew, Caroline, I need to talk to you." "In private." The siblings exchanged worried glances before following their mother. Gabriella, understanding that it was a family matter, excused herself and headed towards the gardens to give them space. As she walked among the perfectly manicured rose bushes, she reflected on the complex dynamics she had observed in just one day. Hopewell Estate wasn't just a family business, it was a microcosm where tradition and innovation, loyalties and secrets were intertwined in patterns as complex as those formed by the roots of the century-old coffee plants. The arrival of Javier Ortega, owner of the neighboring Paradise Estate, and apparently an old acquaintance of the family, interrupted her thoughts. The man, in his 50s and of distinguished bearing, approached with evident curiosity. "How you must be Eleanor's mysterious guest," he greeted, extending his hand. "Javier Ortega at your service. Gabriella Montero, pleased to meet you." The surname sparked a flash of recognition in the man's eyes. "Montero? I didn't know Anthony's family had relatives visiting." "It's a long story," Gabriella replied with a polite but reserved smile. Are you a neighbor of the estate? Neighbor and friendly competitor for decades, Javier explained with a gesture encompassing the horizon. Paradise Estate borders Hopewell on the south side. Our families have maintained a complicated relationship over the years. Something in his tone aroused Gabriella's curiosity. There was an untold story behind those words. The best stories are usually complicated, she replied diplomatically. And the most interesting ones unexpected, Javier added, studying her with renewed interest. Like your sudden appearance in Savannah. Tell me, Miss Montero, what brings you to Hopewell Estate? Before Gabriella could answer, Eleanor's voice interrupted the conversation. I see you've already met our neighbor, Gabriella, said the matriarch, approaching with a firm step. Her expression was cordial but cautious. Javier always has a special talent for appearing at the most opportune moments. I was just stopping by to say hello, dear Eleanor, he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and to remind you of the invitation to the Independence Day celebration at Paradise Estate. Of course, Miss Montero is also invited. The exchange of glances between the two revealed decades of shared history, unresolved tensions, and a delicate balance that Gabriella's presence seemed to be altering. We appreciate the invitation, Eleanor replied formally. We'll confirm our attendance soon. When Javier finally said goodbye, Eleanor remained silent beside Gabriella, contemplating the silhouette of the man walking away towards the exit. Javier Ortega is an intelligent and dangerous man, she finally said. You'd do well to keep your distance, at least until you understand the local dynamics better. He seemed very interested in my presence here. Rumors travel fast in a small town. By tomorrow, half the population of Savannah will be speculating about your identity. Eleanor sighed, as if the weight of decades of secrets suddenly became heavier. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. Gabriella followed the matriarch through corridors and courtyards until they reached a wing of the house she hadn't visited yet. Eleanor opened a carved wooden door and invited her into what turned out to be a private library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with old and modern books, a solid walnut desk, and, occupying the main wall, an impressive family tree painted directly on the wall. The history of the Vances, Eleanor explained, pointing to the intricate mural that depicted intertwined generations from the first Spanish colonists to the present. From 1823, when Samuel Vance acquired these lands, until today. Gabriella scanned the names and dates, instinctively looking for her father's. She found it next to Eleanor's, with two descending lines to Matthew and Caroline. Your name should be here too, Eleanor said, pointing to a space next to her children's. Anthony never told me about you or your mother, but the locket doesn't lie. And your eyes? They're the same as his. The confession, uttered with a mixture of resignation and acceptance, brought a lump to Gabriella's throat. I didn't come to claim a place in your family, Mrs. Vance. I just wanted to know this part of my history. I know, the older woman replied, approaching the desk where a carved wooden box rested. But the truth, once revealed, cannot be hidden again. What we do with it is what will define our future. From the box, she took a leather-bound notebook worn by time. Anthony's diary, she explained, caressing the cover reverently. I found it among his belongings after he left us. I never had the courage to read it completely. Maybe you should. That gesture, giving her something so intimate and personal from her father, was much more than a simple act of generosity. It was a recognition, a legitimization of her right to know the man who had given her life, but not the opportunity to call him father. Thank you, Gabriella murmured, accepting the diary with trembling hands. I will cherish it as the treasure that it is. There's another reason why I wanted to talk to you alone, Eleanor continued, sitting in one of the reading armchairs and inviting Gabriella to do the same. The Japanese visit coincides with the preparation of the estate's centennial. Caroline has told me about your expertise in organic crops and origin certification. We could use an outside opinion to evaluate some of our current practices. It would be an honor to contribute, Gabriella replied sincerely, although I understand the reluctance that Matthew and Caroline might feel towards my participation. My children are intelligent, but sometimes too protective of what they consider their exclusive legacy, Eleanor reflected with a half smile. It will do them good to remember that the best harvests usually come from diversity, not uniformity. The metaphor didn't go unnoticed by Gabriella, who was beginning to appreciate the sharp intelligence hidden behind the apparent fragility of the woman who had run Hopewell Estate for decades. Tomorrow I'll organize a meeting with the technical team, Eleanor continued. Your perspective could be especially valuable for the certification the Japanese demand. If you agree, of course. Completely. I will put all my experience at the estate's disposal. The conversation was interrupted by Lucy, who announced that dinner was served. As they headed towards the dining room, Gabriella felt that something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between her and Eleanor. It wasn't yet full trust, but a tacit pact to explore together a terrain unknown to both. In the dining room, Matthew and Caroline were already waiting along with the Japanese visitors. The meal proceeded with conversations about international markets and cultivation methods, a field where Gabriella was able to contribute observations that visibly impressed the businessman. When she mentioned her experience with coffee cooperatives in New Orleans, the Japanese's interest intensified. We're precisely looking to expand our portfolio with single-origin coffees, Mr. Yamamoto commented. The story behind the product is as important as its quality for our clients. Hopewell Estate has both, Eleanor interjected with pride. 100 years of family tradition and internationally recognized quality. And now it also has Miss Montero, added the businessman with a respectful bow towards Gabriella. Her knowledge of organic certifications is exactly what we value. The look Matthew directed at Gabriella mixed surprise and a new professional respect. Caroline, for her part, seemed to be reconsidering her initial perceptions. That night, as the estate fell silent, Gabriella stayed awake, reading her father's diary in the dim light of a lamp. The yellowed pages revealed a complex man, passionate about the land, visionary in his projects, but also divided between two worlds, two loves, two loyalties. She found mentions of her mother, descriptions of New Orleans that conveyed genuine affection, and finally, entries about a little girl with amber eyes who filled his visits with joy. My daughter, Anthony had written in an entry dated when Gabriella was just 3 years old. She has the same curiosity about plants that I had at her age. Today I found her examining the coffee leaves I brought as a sample, asking why some were darker than others. Someday she will understand that she carries the legacy of Hopewell Estate in her blood, even though she can never openly claim her inheritance. Tears blurred Gabriella's vision as she read those words that confirmed what her mother had always told her. Anthony had loved her in his way, and within the complicated circumstances that separated them. She closed the diary and approached the window. The full moon bathed the coffee plantations in a silvery light that transformed the landscape into something almost dreamlike. Somewhere among those fields, Gabriella thought, a part of her history was buried, invisible roots that connected her to this land and this family beyond documents and surnames. As she contemplated that landscape that was simultaneously new and familiar, Gabriella could not imagine how her arrival was about to trigger events that would forever transform the destiny of Hopewell Estate and all its inhabitants. The following days unfolded at a constant pace, allowing Gabriella to gradually integrate into the daily life of Hopewell Estate. In the mornings, she toured the coffee plantations with Caroline, implementing the FOMA treatment she had recommended. Afternoons were dedicated to reviewing documentation on cultivation and processing practices with the technical team, offering suggestions based on her experience in New Orleans. And in the evenings, she continued reading Anthony's diary, uncovering facets of her father she had never known. The relationship with the Vance siblings evolved at different speeds. Caroline, initially the most distant, began to show a professional respect that occasionally transformed into complicity when they shared technical observations. Matthew, on the other hand, maintained a formal courtesy that rarely revealed his true thoughts, although his attitude had softened considerably after observing the favorable impression Gabriella had made on the Japanese businessman. That morning, the sky threatened rain as Gabriella and Caroline examined the treated plants in the east sector. The preliminary results were promising. The new leaves showed signs of recovery, and the infection seemed contained. It worked, Caroline acknowledged, carefully inspecting a young coffee plant whose foliage was beginning to regain vigor. I didn't expect such quick results. It's only the beginning, Gabriella qualified. We'll need to maintain the treatment for at least 3 more weeks to be sure, and adjust the drainage system in this section to prevent future outbreaks. Caroline nodded, taking notes in her field notebook. She wore her hair tucked under a straw hat, and her usually serious face had relaxed slightly in recent days. My father would have appreciated your approach, she commented unexpectedly. He always said that the best agronomists listen to the plants before prescribing solutions. The casual mention of Anthony, without the tension that usually accompanied any reference to him, pleasantly surprised Gabriella. My mother used to say he could identify problems in the coffee plantations simply by the smell of the earth at dawn. Caroline smiled briefly. He could. He used to wake us before dawn to greet the coffee plants, as he used to say. Matthew hated it, but I loved it. That small exchange, seemingly trivial, represented a subtle but significant change. For the first time, Caroline shared a personal memory of Anthony with Gabriella, implicitly acknowledging her right to be part of that family memory. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Joaquin, the head foreman, who approached hurriedly. "Ms. Caroline, there's a problem in the processing warehouse. One of the mechanical dryers stopped working, and we have the entire harvest from the west sector at risk." Caroline checked her watch with a worried expression. "Just when the technician is in San Antonio," she murmured, before turning to Gabriella. "Would you mind continuing the inspection alone? This requires immediate attention." "Go ahead," Gabriella replied. "I'll finish here and document the results." As Caroline hurried away with Joaquin, Gabriella continued her methodical tour of the coffee plantations. The threat of rain intensified, with dark clouds gathering over the surrounding mountains. The air smelled of damp earth and coffee, a combination that had always been strangely comforting to her. Approaching a stream that marked the boundary between two sections of the plantation, Gabriella noticed something unusual. A group of workers watched the stream with concern, where the water flowed stronger than normal for that time of year. "Is something wrong?" she asked, approaching them. "The water has been murky for 3 days, miss," explained an older woman who introduced herself as Josephine. "And it has a strange smell like chemicals. The fish have started to appear dead on the bank." Gabriella knelt by the stream, carefully observing the water and collecting a sample in a jar she carried for her botanical inspections. "Have you reported this to Miss Caroline or Mr. Matthew?" "Yes, miss," another worker replied. "Mr. Matthew came yesterday, took some samples, and said he would have the water analyzed. But now the problem seems worse." Gabriella walked upstream, following the trail of contaminated water. After several minutes of walking, she reached a point where the stream narrowed near the southern boundary of the property. There, the smell of chemicals was more intense. "This stream comes from Paradise Estate, doesn't it?" she asked one of the workers who had accompanied her. "Yes, miss, it originates in the mountains and crosses their land first before reaching ours." A suspicion began to form in Gabriella's mind. "Do you know if they have recently changed their cultivation methods? It's rumored that Mr. Ortega hired foreign consultants a few months ago," the man commented, instinctively lowering his voice. "Since then, they've been fumigating more often and with different products." Gabriella took more samples and photographs with her phone, carefully documenting what she had observed. The water contamination not only posed a risk to the crops, but potentially to the organic certification that the Japanese buyers valued so much. Back at the main house, she found Matthew reviewing documents on the terrace. His expression turned alert when he saw the jar of murky water Gabriella carried with her. "I see you've noticed it too," he commented, pointing to some reports on the table. "I'm waiting for the lab results, but it's quite evident that something's wrong with that stream." "The origin seems to be Paradise Estate," Gabriella pointed out, showing him the photographs on her phone. "The workers mention recent changes in their cultivation methods." Matthew studied the images with a frown. "Javier has always been quite flexible with his agricultural practices. But this goes beyond acceptable. If these chemicals seep into our crops, it could compromise the entire organic certification," Gabriella warned, "especially in the plots that are irrigated with that stream." "I know," Matthew replied, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that Gabriella understood he had inherited from Anthony. "And the certifier's visit is scheduled for next week, just before closing the deal with the Japanese." For the first time since her arrival, Gabriella perceived a vulnerability in Matthew, a genuine concern that went beyond his usual image of control. That small glimpse of humanity encouraged her to propose something she had been considering. "In New Orleans, we faced a similar problem a few years ago," she commented, sitting down opposite him. "We developed a natural filtration system using local plants that can absorb certain pollutants. It's not a permanent solution, but it could help mitigate the impact while the root problem is resolved." Matthew looked at her with renewed interest. "How long would it take to implement it?" With the right materials and enough manpower, we could have it working in 3 days. Make me a list of what you need, Matthew decided after a moment of reflection. And choose the personnel you want from the workers. You have carte blanche for this, sir. That authorization represented a trust Gabriella hadn't expected to earn so soon. Thank you for the opportunity, she said sincerely. I won't disappoint you. I'm not doing this out of generosity, Matthew clarified frankly. I'm doing it because you seem to be the only one with a viable solution at this critical moment. Gabriella nodded, appreciating his honesty. Fair or not, we're in the same boat, Matthew. Your interest in saving the organic certification coincides with my desire to protect our father's legacy. The deliberate use of our father caused a flicker of discomfort in Matthew's eyes, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he extended his hand in a formal but significant gesture. Then let's work together on this. For Hopewell Estate. Over the next 3 days, Gabriella led a team of workers in the construction of a sophisticated biofiltration system at several strategic points along the stream, using a combination of local plants with purifying properties, gravels of different calibers, and natural oxygenation techniques. She managed to create a mechanism that began to show results almost immediately. The water, although not completely clean, visibly improved in quality as it passed through the filters. Caroline, initially skeptical, was impressed by the system's effectiveness. It's ingenious, she acknowledged, as they inspected the last installed filter together, and completely compatible with our organic production philosophy. It's only a temporary solution, Gabriella insisted. The real problem is still at the source of the contamination. Matthew is preparing a formal complaint to the environmental authorities, Caroline explained, but the Ortegas have powerful connections in the state government. These processes tend to drag on indefinitely. Have you considered talking directly to Mr. Ortega? Perhaps he's unaware of the full impact of the new methods he's implementing. Caroline let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor. Javier Ortega isn't the type of man who acts out of ignorance. Every move he makes is calculated, especially when it affects our family. Something in her tone aroused Gabriella's curiosity. There seems to be a personal history behind that rivalry. Caroline hesitated visibly, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, as they returned to the house under a sky that was finally beginning to clear, she decided to share part of that history. Javier and my father were friends in their youth before becoming competitors. According to our mother, there was a time when the rivalry became personal, something related to disputed land and other issues that were never openly discussed. Do you think this contamination could be deliberate then, a form of sabotage? It wouldn't be the first time Paradise Estate has caused conveniently timed problems to affect our business, Caroline replied, carefully choosing her words. The last time was 10 years ago, when a mysterious fire destroyed part of our harvest right before a major export. The conversation was interrupted when they spotted Eleanor on the porch, accompanied by an unexpected visitor. Gabriella immediately recognized the elegant woman in her 50s, Marcela Ortega, Javier's sister, and a prominent figure in local society, according to what she had read in Anthony's diary. Caroline, Gabriella, Eleanor called with a strained smile. Marcela has come to personally extend the invitation to the Independence Day celebration at Paradise Estate. The greetings and introductions proceeded with the formality typical of families who maintain a public courtesy that barely hides deeper tensions. Marcela studied Gabriella with evident curiosity. "So you're Anthony's daughter," she commented with a smile that didn't reach her dark eyes. "The resemblance is striking, especially in the eyes." The comment, uttered naturally but laden with implicit meanings, confirmed what Gabriella suspected. Her identity was already known beyond the walls of Hopewell Estate. "My brother will be delighted to get to know you better during the celebration," Marcela continued. "He always had great respect for Anthony despite their professional disagreements." Eleanor intervened diplomatically. "Of course we'll attend. The Independence Day celebration at Paradise Estate is a tradition we all appreciate." When Marcela finally said goodbye, the accumulated tension seemed to dissipate slightly. Caroline and Eleanor exchanged meaningful glances. "Rumors fly," Eleanor commented, turning to Gabriella. "Your presence is already a topic of conversation throughout Savannah." "I'm sorry if this complicates things," Gabriella replied sincerely. "It's not your fault," Eleanor reassured her. "Secrets in small towns have short legs. It was only a matter of time." She paused before adding, "However, we must now be strategic about how to publicly manage your relationship with the family, especially considering the celebration at Paradise Estate. What do you suggest, Mom? Caroline asked. The truth simplified, Eleanor decided after a moment of reflection. Gabriella is Anthony's daughter. She's getting to know the estate and she's collaborating with us thanks to her professional expertise. No additional details, no apologies, no unnecessary explanations. Eleanor's clarity and resolution pleasantly surprised Gabriella. There was no rejection or shame in her approach, but a pragmatic acceptance that offered a way forward. I agree, Gabriella nodded. Transparency without drama. Perfect, Eleanor concluded. Caroline, tell Matthew. We'll need to present a united front during the celebration. As Caroline left to find her brother, Eleanor gently took Gabriella's arm, guiding her to the inner garden where they could talk more privately. There's something else you should know before the celebration, said the matriarch, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. The relationship between the Vances and the Ortegas wasn't always one of rivalry. There was a time when our families were about to unite. Through marriage, Gabriella asked, sensing where the conversation was headed. Eleanor nodded, sitting on a stone bench surrounded by bougainvilleas. Marcella and Anthony were briefly engaged before he met me. The breakup of the engagement was the origin of the enmity between Javier and your father. That revelation fit with some cryptic entries Gabriella had found in Anthony's diary, references to a youthful mistake and broken promises that she had never been able to fully contextualize. Do you think Marcella still harbors resentment? The Ortegas have a long memory for offenses, real or perceived, Eleanor replied with a sigh. And your existence? Well, let's just say it complicates the narrative that Marcella has maintained all these years. What narrative? That Anthony made the biggest mistake of his life by choosing me, that he was never truly happy, that our union was more a convenient arrangement than a marriage for love. Eleanor spoke with the serenity of someone who has heard these insinuations for decades without letting them affect her. Your appearance confirms that Anthony had another significant relationship, but not with Marcella, as she perhaps would have preferred to believe. Gabriella began to understand the complexity of the situation she had entered. It wasn't simply a matter of being recognized by her father's family, but of her insertion into a network of alliances, rivalries, and old wounds that defined the relationships between the most powerful estates in the region. Perhaps I should stay away from the celebration, she suggested, aware of the potential conflicts her presence could exacerbate. On the contrary, Eleanor replied firmly, your absence would generate more speculation than your presence, and the Vances never run away from difficult situations. She took Gabriella's hands in hers, a gesture of solidarity that would have been unthinkable just a few days before. We'll go together, as a family. Whatever our history, we share a present and possibly a future. Those words, spoken with the moral authority only Eleanor could bestow, sealed a new pact between the two women. They were no longer simply the wife and the extramarital daughter united by an absent man, but allies in the protection of a shared legacy. As they returned to the house, where Matthew and Caroline were waiting to discuss both the contaminated stream problem and the strategy for the celebration at Paradise Estate, neither could imagine how the events of the coming weeks would test this nascent alliance in ways neither had anticipated. On the night of the Independence Day celebration, Paradise Estate shone under thousands of lights that outlined its colonial buildings. Tricolor flags fluttered in the night breeze, while mariachis roamed the gardens playing Mexican classics for the hundreds of guests representing the social and economic elite of the region. The Vance's car passed through the elaborate entrance, where the Ortega's crest and eagle over a coffee plant dominated the main facade. Eleanor, elegant in a navy blue dress and her hair pulled back in a classic bun, cast a last look at her family before getting out of the car. Remember, dignity and composure above all, she unnecessarily reminded. We're here out of tradition and courtesy, not to fuel rumors. Gabriella, who had opted for a simple but elegant emerald green dress, felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity as they entered the main courtyard where Javier Ortega, impeccable in a dark suit, personally greeted the most important guests. Eleanor, as radiant as ever, he greeted with a courtesy that barely concealed deeper tensions. Matthew, Caroline, and of course Miss Montero, a pleasure to have you all at our home. Thank you for the invitation, Javier, Eleanor replied with equal formality. Paradise Estate looks especially splendid tonight. Javier's eyes lingered on Gabriella longer than necessary. studying her with an intensity that was slightly uncomfortable. "The resemblance is truly striking," he finally commented. "Anthony would be proud to see his daughter become such a distinguished woman." "I hope you enjoy the evening, Miss Montero." "Thank you, Mr. Ortega," Gabriela replied with a polite smile. "Your estate is as impressive as I've been told." The seemingly cordial exchange was laden with subtexts that didn't go unnoticed by those present. The explicit mention of Anthony and the public acknowledgement of Gabriela as his daughter set a tone for the evening. The Ortegas didn't intend to maintain social fictions. As they moved among the guests, Gabriela perceived curious glances and barely disguised murmurs. Her appearance alongside the Vance family confirmed the rumors that had circulated for days in Savannah's social circles. "Ignore the stairs," Caroline murmured, surprising Gabriela with this gesture of solidarity. "In a week they'll find another scandal to gossip about." The central courtyard of Paradise Estate had been transformed into an elegant outdoor ballroom. Tables arranged around a dance floor, floral centerpieces in national colors, and waiters circulating offering champagne and canapes. At one end, an orchestra played background music, occasionally alternating with the mariachi for the more traditional pieces. "Gabriela Montero," a female voice interrupted her observations. "At last I have the pleasure of meeting you personally." Marcela Ortega, splendid in a red dress that accentuated her still slender figure, offered her a glass of champagne. Her eyes, the same dark shade as her brother's, studied Gabriela with a mixture of curiosity and something harder to interpret. "Mrs. Ortega," Gabriela greeted, accepting the glass. "Thank you for including me in the invitation. Please call me Marcela. After all, we could almost have been family under other circumstances." The deliberately provocative comment was uttered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Gabriela maintained her composure, aware that she was being evaluated. "Life has unexpected paths for all of us," she replied diplomatically. "Certainly." Marcela took a small sip of her drink. Anthony had a special talent for surprises. Even after his passing, he continues to reveal new facets of his life. Before Gabriela could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a young couple. The man, in his mid-30s, had an air of authority that contrasted with his amiable smile. "Allow me to introduce you to my nephew, Ricardo Ortega," Marcela continued, "and his wife, Isabel. Ricardo oversees our international exports." The greetings were cordial but brief, as Ricardo was almost immediately claimed by other guests. Isabel, however, remained with them, observing Gabriela with genuine interest. "Everyone is intrigued by your arrival in Savannah," Isabel commented with refreshing frankness. "It's not common for traditional families to confront their secrets so openly." "I didn't come to expose secrets," Gabriela clarified, "just to know a part of my history that was denied to me, and to provide innovative solutions for Hopewell Estate, as far as I understand," Isabel added, surprising Gabriela with that specific knowledge. "My brother works in the state government's environmental department. He commented on a biofiltration system you recently implemented." The conversation shifted to professional topics, allowing Gabriela to relax slightly. Isabel turned out to be an intelligent and genuinely interested interlocutor in sustainable agriculture, creating an oasis of normality amidst the complex social dynamics surrounding her. During dinner, the Vances were seated at the main table alongside the Ortegas, an honor that reflected both their social status and the particular attention Javier wanted to dedicate to them that night. Gabriela, seated between Caroline and Eleanor, observed the interactions with the unique perspective of someone who is simultaneously a part of and an observer of the situation. The crucial moment arrived when Javier Ortega stood up for the traditional host's toast. After the usual patriotic references appropriate for the date, he turned his gaze to the Vance's table. "This year we have the special honor of having among us an unexpected addition to the Montero family," he declared, raising his glass towards Gabriela, "Anthony's daughter, whose presence reminds us that the legacy of our families continues to surprise us. I toast to the bonds that unite us, even those that remained hidden for decades." A murmur ran through the room as the guests processed that public declaration. Eleanor maintained a serene expression, although Gabriela could notice how her knuckles whitened around her glass. Matthew and Caroline exchanged worried glances. "To Gabriela Montero," Javier concluded, "and to the truths that finally come to light." The toast, framed as a gesture of welcome, had an evident subtext for those who knew the story. Javier Ortega had just turned Gabriela's presence into a public spectacle, exposing what the Vances had tried to handle discreetly. Eleanor was the first to react, standing up with her characteristic dignity. "Thank you, Javier, for your words," she replied in a clear voice. "Indeed, our family has been enriched by Gabriela's return. Her talent as an agronomist is already benefiting Hopewell Estate, as you have undoubtedly noticed in the results of her innovative filtration system that is purifying the stream we share." The reference to the contaminated stream did not go unnoticed. It was Eleanor's elegant way of returning the blow, reminding everyone present that she was perfectly aware of the origin of their recent environmental problems. The rest of the evening proceeded in a barely concealed tension under layers of social courtesy. Gabriela danced a piece with Matthew, a calculated gesture to show family unity, and briefly conversed with several guests interested in getting to know her better. To her surprise, many expressed genuine admiration for her work in sustainable agriculture, showing that her professional reputation had begun to circulate along with the rumors about her origin. Late into the night, as the orchestra played a traditional waltz, Javier Ortega approached Gabriela and requested a dance. The invitation, impossible to refuse without creating a scene, placed her in the uncomfortable position of sharing the intimate space of the dance floor with her family's apparent antagonist. "I must confess that your arrival has been more interesting than I anticipated," Javier commented, as he skillfully guided her among the other couples. Few people manage to alter the balance of power in Savannah so efficiently in such a short time. "It wasn't my intention to alter balances," Gabriela replied, maintaining a neutral expression. "I was just looking for my roots. Roots are precisely what matters most in our business, don't you think?" Javier's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They determine the strength of everything that grows afterwards." "The soil where they are planted also matters," Gabriela retorted, "and the care they receive." "Perspicacious like your father," Javier agreed. "Anthony always had an exceptional vision for hidden potential. He demonstrated it by acquiring those indigenous lands when no one else saw their value." The seemingly casual comment immediately caught Gabriela's attention. "Indigenous lands? Oh, I thought you would already know," Javier replied with feigned surprise. "The west sector of Hopewell Estate, where your best coffee plants now grow, originally belonged to an indigenous community, a disputed land that Anthony acquired under, let's say, opportune circumstances." The music continued, but Gabriela felt the world around her slow down. She had never heard about this aspect of the family history, nor had her mother mentioned it, nor did it appear in Anthony's diary. "I see I've touched on a topic unknown to you," Javier continued, pleased with the effect of his words. "Perhaps you should ask Mrs. Vance about the complete origins of the family fortune. After all, if you're going to claim your share of the Vance legacy, you should know exactly what you're inheriting." When the piece ended, Javier bowed respectfully. "It has been a pleasure, Miss Montero. I hope you find all the answers you're looking for, although some may be uncomfortable." Gabriela returned to the family table with a racing mind, processing this new information that potentially recontextualized everything she thought she knew about her father and Hopewell Estate. Eleanor immediately noticed her disturbed expression. "What did Javier tell you?" she asked softly. "He mentioned something about indigenous lands acquired by my father, disputed lands." Eleanor's expression hardened momentarily. Javier has always been an expert at sowing doubt at the most opportune moment. "We'll talk about this at home, not here." The return to Hopewell Estate was mostly silent, each family member absorbed in their own thoughts. Once in the privacy of the family library, Eleanor finally addressed the topic Javier had so strategically introduced. "It's true that part of our land was acquired from an indigenous community," the matriarch confirmed, pouring a small glass of liqueur for each of them. "But the circumstances weren't as Javier surely insinuated." "What really happened?" Gabriela asked, anxious to understand this unknown part of her family history. Eleanor approached the large map of the estate that hung on one of the walls. "The west sector, approximately 1/3 of our current land, belonged to an indigenous community until the 1980s. They had maintained traditional cultivation methods for generations, but they faced increasing economic and legal pressures." "From Paradise Estate," Caroline ventured, who had remained particularly silent during the return trip. "Among others," Eleanor nodded. "Several estates and companies were trying to acquire those lands, known for their exceptional microclimate. Javier Ortega's father led a particularly aggressive campaign, including legal actions based on alleged irregularities in the community's property titles. "And my father took advantage of the situation?" Gabriella asked, fearing the answer. "Your father did the opposite," Eleanor corrected, surprising everyone. "When he learned about the situation, he proposed a cooperative model to the community. Hopewell Estate would legally purchase the land, protecting the community from litigation, but would implement a program where the original inhabitants would continue working their own plots, receiving training, improved seeds, and, most importantly, a share in the profits of the production. Matthew, who had been leaning against the window frame, intervened for the first time. That cooperative model was revolutionary for its time. Many criticized it as idealistic, including Javier's father, who couldn't conceive of sharing profits with those he considered mere workers. The agreement also included preservation of traditional practices and respect for culturally significant sites, Eleanor continued. Anthony integrated indigenous knowledge about sustainable cultivation that is now a fundamental part of our organic methods. Gabriella processed this information, which presented her father in a different light than that insinuated by Javier Ortega. What happened to that cooperative model? Is it still functioning? An uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. Caroline and Matthew exchanged glances, while Eleanor sighed deeply before answering. "After Anthony's passing, we faced severe financial difficulties. The bank threatened to foreclose mortgages, and we lost several important contracts." Eleanor spoke with the gravity of someone reliving painful decisions. "To save the estate, we had to restructure. The cooperative model was gradually modified. We maintained some elements such as preferential hiring of community members, but the profit-sharing system was transformed into a more limited annual bonus program. What Javier didn't mention," Matthew added, "is that his family tried to take advantage of our vulnerability after Dad's passing to acquire precisely those lands at liquidation prices." "And they're still trying," Caroline commented. "The recent stream contamination is no coincidence. It mainly affects the west sector, reducing its productivity and therefore its value." Gabriella began to understand the real dimensions of the conflict between the estates. It wasn't simply commercial competition or personal squabbles. At stake was a fundamentally different vision of the relationship between land, labor, and community. "In my father's diary," she finally said, "he mentions several times his desire to recover the lost balance. I always thought he was referring to his personal life, but now I see that it could have had another meaning." Eleanor nodded slowly. Anthony always regretted not being able to defend his original vision for those lands. He considered them a social experiment as much as an agricultural one. "An experiment that could be revived," Gabriella suggested, an idea forming in her mind. "With current organic and fair trade certifications, a renewed cooperative model could be not only ethically correct but also commercially viable." The suggestion provoked mixed reactions. Matthew showed skepticism, Caroline cautious interest, while in Eleanor's eyes shone a glimmer of what seemed like recognition, as if she heard the echo of Anthony's words through his daughter. "It wouldn't be easy to restructure again," Matthew warned. "Current financial commitments, export contract, but not impossible either," Caroline interrupted, surprising her brother. "Especially if the West sector increases its productivity thanks to more sustainable practices." "It's a conversation that deserves to be continued," Eleanor concluded in a conciliatory tone. "But it's been a long and emotionally intense night for everyone. I suggest we rest and resume this with clearer minds." As the family dispersed to their respective rooms, Gabriella remained a few more minutes in the library, studying the map of the estate with new eyes. The West sector, marked in a more intense green than the rest, represented not only physical land but an ideological legacy of her father that had remained incomplete. In her room, far from the evaluating gazes of Savannah's society and the family revelations, Gabriella opened Anthony's diary again, searching for additional clues about his vision for those indigenous lands. She found a particularly revealing entry, dated just a year before his passing. "The true value of the land is not measured in dollars per acre, but in the well-being it generates for those who work it and in the health it maintains for future generations. If Hopewell Estate is to last another century, it must rediscover this essential truth that the indigenous people never forgot." Those words now took on a deeper meaning, becoming a possible bridge between a truncated past and a future to be built. With this reflection, Gabriella finally gave herself over to sleep, while outside her window the coffee plantations swayed under the same moon that had illuminated generations of intertwined stories on those lands. The morning after the celebration dawned with a fine drizzle soaking the coffee plantations of Hopewell Estate, as if nature wanted to wash away the tensions accumulated the previous night. Gabriella awoke early, her mind still processing the revelations about the history of the indigenous lands and her father's aborted project. After dressing in practical clothes, she silently went out to the corridor. The estate was barely waking up, with only a few workers heading to their morning tasks. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and personal connection, Gabriella decided to visit the West Sector, the lands that had acquired a special meaning after the previous night's conversations. She took an estate truck, driving along dirt roads that snaked between increasingly dense coffee plantations. As she moved westward, she noticed subtle changes in the landscape. The shade trees were more diverse, with native species predominating. The undergrowth seemed more natural and less interfered with, and the coffee plants, although perfectly aligned, coexisted with other plants in a balance that suggested more traditional practices. She stopped the vehicle next to a small hill from which she had a wide panoramic view. There she discovered a circular stone structure, partially covered in moss, that seemed to predate the estate's presence on these lands. An indigenous ceremonial site, she supposed, one of those that Anthony had promised to preserve in his original agreement. "Good morning, miss." An elderly man's kind voice interrupted her observations. "It's not common to see visitors so early in this part of the estate." "Good morning," Gabriella replied, observing with interest the old man who leaned on a carved cane. "I'm Gabriella Montero. I'm staying at the main house. Anthony's daughter." The man nodded without surprise in his voice. "My name is Manuel Gomez. I worked with your father for many years, especially in this sector." That chance encounter seemed almost providential. "Did you know about the original project for these lands? The cooperative model?" The old man's eyes lit up with the glow of precious memories. "Not only did I know it, miss, I was one of the indigenous representatives who negotiated with Mr. Anthony. This place where we're standing is where we signed the agreement next to our sacred site." Over the next hour, seated on the ancient stones as the drizzle gradually subsided, Manuel shared with Gabriella stories that did not appear in the estate's official records or in Anthony's diary. Stories of how her father had slowly gained the community's trust, learning indigenous words, respecting local traditions, and finally proposing a model that integrated the best of both worlds. "Mr. Anthony used to say that coffee plants are like people," Manuel recalled with a nostalgic smile. "They need their own strong roots, but they truly thrive when they grow in community, supporting each other." "What happened after he left?" Gabriella asked, although she already sensed part of the answer. Manuel's expression darkened slightly. "Difficult times came to the estate. Mrs. Vance did what she could, but the banks and competitors were pressing hard. The original model gradually faded away, not out of ill will but out of necessity. And the indigenous community? What happened to the original families? Some of us remain, like me, working for the estate. Others moved to the city or other plantations. Young people especially sought opportunities elsewhere when they saw that the original promises were fading. That direct testimony gave human dimension to what the previous night had been merely an abstract discussion in the estate's library. Gabriella now understood more clearly why her father had considered this project fundamental, beyond mere business innovation. "Do you think it would be possible to recover something of that original vision?" she asked, genuinely interested in Manuel's perspective. The old man contemplated the coffee plantations stretching below the hill before answering. "Good seeds never lose their potential, miss, even if they spend years dormant. With the right rain and care, they can always germinate again." When Gabriella returned to the main house, she found the family gathered in the dining room for breakfast. The atmosphere was tense, with Matthew reviewing documents between bites and Caroline engrossed in her tablet. "Good morning," Gabriella greeted, taking a seat next to Eleanor. "I went out early to see the West Sector." "From your expression, I imagine it was revealing," Eleanor commented, serving her freshly brewed coffee. "I met Manuel Gomez," Gabriella replied, observing how this name provoked diverse reactions among those present. "He told me about the original agreement and what it represented for the indigenous community." Matthew set his documents aside. "Manuel is one of our oldest and most respected workers, also one of the most idealistic, and one of the most knowledgeable about traditional cultivation," Caroline added, with evident respect in her voice. His pruning and shading methods are still a reference for all the technical staff. Manuel showed me practices that combine traditional wisdom with modern efficiency, Gabriella commented. Precisely the kind of approach that Japanese buyers particularly value for the premium market. That's true, Matthew acknowledged. Mr. Yamamoto was particularly impressed with the coffee samples from the West sector, although he doesn't know its particular history. Perhaps he should know it, Gabriella suggested. The story of how those lands maintain ancestral practices could add cultural value to the organic certification they seek. The conversation shifted to concrete commercial possibilities, with Gabriella proposing a marketing approach that highlighted the cultural heritage of the coffee produced in the West sector. The initial tension gradually subsided in the face of shared enthusiasm for ideas that would benefit the estate. I propose something more ambitious, Gabriella finally declared, feeling that the moment was opportune. To recover key elements of the original cooperative model, at least for the West sector, not just as a marketing strategy, but as a real commitment to the vision my father tried to implement. It sounds inspiring, Matthew replied pragmatically, but times have changed. Operating costs, productivity demands, current financial commitments. Precisely because times have changed, it could work better now than before, Gabriella argued. Fair trade and social responsibility are no longer ideals, but competitive advantages in international markets. Consumers are willing to pay more for products with authentic stories and tangible values. We would have to calculate it carefully, Caroline intervened, her training as a production manager evident in her approach. Make realistic projections, assess transition costs, and consult with the community, Eleanor added, surprising her children with her apparent receptiveness to the idea. If we're going to revisit Anthony's vision, we must do so by honoring his spirit of genuine collaboration, not as a mere commercial strategy. To everyone's astonishment, it was Matthew who finally gave the decisive push. The contract with the Japanese would give us the financial margin to try it, at least as a pilot project. If it works, it could gradually expand. That breakfast marked the beginning of intense weeks of planning, research, and dialogue. Gabriella, initially seen as an intruder, found herself working closely with Caroline in designing a renewed model that integrated the best of Anthony's original project with contemporary innovations in sustainable agriculture and fair trade. Manuel Gomez became a key collaborator, helping to contact indigenous families who had left the region but maintained ties to their ancestral land. Some expressed initial skepticism, marked by past promises that had not been fully kept, but Gabriella's presence, seen as a continuation of Anthony's legacy, generated openness to dialogue. Not everything was harmony, however. The initiative aroused resistance both within and outside the estate. Some supervisors saw the proposed model as a threat to their established methods. The financial manager raised objections based on potential impacts on short-term profit margins. And externally, when rumors about the restructuring began to circulate, Javier Ortega intensified his efforts to interfere. One particularly tense afternoon, Matthew returned from a meeting in Savannah with worrying news. Paradise Estate has filed a lawsuit claiming rights to part of the stream that divides our properties, he announced during a family meeting. Apparently, they have found historical documents that question the established boundaries. Just now, when we're implementing the new model, the coincidence seemed suspicious to Caroline. It's no coincidence, Matthew confirmed. According to my contact at City Hall, Javier has been specifically investigating the property titles of the West sector since the Independence Day celebration. He's trying to destabilize us precisely when we're most vulnerable due to the transition, Eleanor observed. An old Ortega tactic. And the Japanese, Gabriella asked, concerned about the potential impact on the commercial negotiations. For now, they're unaware of the legal situation, Matthew replied. But they'll arrive next week for the final contract signing and organic certification inspection. If they perceive instability or risks, there was no need to complete the sentence. Everyone understood the potential consequences for the estate if the international agreement were compromised. We need to resolve this before their arrival, Eleanor declared with determination. Matthew, consult with our lawyers about the real validity of those alleged historical documents. Caroline, make sure all organic certification protocols are impeccable, especially in the areas near the disputed stream. I can talk to Manuel and the indigenous representatives, Gabriella offered. Perhaps they have knowledge of old territorial agreements that could counter the Ortega's claims. With the action plan established, each family member dedicated themselves to their part with the urgency the situation demanded. For Gabriela, this crisis represented a definitive test of both her commitment to Hopewell Estate and the real acceptance of her place in the Vance family. The conversation with Manuel proved more revealing than anticipated. The old man, after hearing about the Ortega's lawsuit, asked for permission to access some old chests kept in the tool shed that he supervised. Mr. Anthony entrusted these documents to me shortly before he left, he explained, carefully extracting yellowed papers protected in leather cases. He said that one day they might be needed to protect what we had built together. The documents, written in Spanish and Indigenous, included not only the original cooperative agreement, but also detailed maps that clearly established the territorial boundaries, with natural markers such as ancient trees and rock formations that validated the estate's current borders. More importantly, they were signed not only by Anthony, but also by municipal authorities of the time and independent witnesses. This could completely invalidate the Ortega's claim, Gabriela observed, studying the maps with growing hope. Mr. Anthony was always careful with legal details, Manuel smiled. He used to say that justice needs both passion and precision. That same afternoon, gathered again in the library, the Vance family reviewed the recovered documents with astonishment and renewed gratitude towards Anthony. These maps are definitive, Matthew confirmed after comparing them with current records. They not only refute Javier's claim, but also strengthen our rights over areas that have been informally disputed for years. And the original cooperative agreements give us a solid legal basis for the renewed model we're implementing, Caroline added, reviewing the clauses with professional interest. They're surprisingly well structured for their time. Your father, Eleanor commented, turning to Gabriela with a mixture of nostalgia and admiration, always anticipated scenarios that others didn't even imagine as possible. These documents are his way of continuing to protect what he valued, even after his passing. The discovery of those documents not only provided a legal defense against Javier Ortega's maneuvers, but also emotionally validated the project Gabriela had begun to lead. It was no longer simply an initiative inspired by abstract ideals, but the concrete continuation of an interrupted legacy. The following days were of frantic activity. While the estate's lawyers prepared the legal response to the Ortega's lawsuit, Gabriela and Caroline worked with Manuel and other indigenous representatives on formalizing the renewed cooperative model. Matthew, for his part, oversaw the preparations for the imminent visit of the Japanese businessman, ensuring that every detail reflected both the tradition and innovation that characterized Hopewell Estate. News of the lawsuit and its apparent resolution spread quickly throughout the community. To the Vances' surprise, this development generated a wave of unexpected support. Former indigenous workers who had left the estate years ago began to appear, offering testimonies supporting the documents found and expressing interest in participating in the renewed model. It's as if they've been waiting for a sign, Gabriela commented to Eleanor as they watched a group of indigenous families gathered with Manuel in the courtyard. A confirmation that that original promise hadn't been completely forgotten. Community memory is long, Eleanor replied wisely, and hope, resilient. These are values that Anthony understood better than any of us. The morning the Japanese representatives arrived at Hopewell Estate for the final inspection, the sky dawned clear after days of intermittent drizzle, a good omen according to local tradition. The delegation, headed by Mr. Yamamoto and his team of certifiers, was received with the estate's characteristic hospitality, but this time with an additional element. Indigenous representatives dressed in traditional clothing gave a welcome in their native language, offering a brief but meaningful ceremony that honored the land and its fruits. Impressive, Mr. Yamamoto commented to Matthew as they toured the coffee plantations. This cultural connection adds a dimension that distinguishes Hopewell Estate from other organic producers. It's part of our history and our future, Matthew replied, with a pride that surprised Gabriela, who was walking alongside them. The cooperative model we're implementing in the West sector recovers traditional practices that have proven their sustainability for centuries. The technical inspection was rigorous but successful. The biofiltration systems implemented by Gabriela received special praise, as did the integrated cultivation methods that combined ancestral wisdom with modern innovations. Every aspect examined confirmed not only the exceptional quality of the coffee produced, but also the ethical and environmental values that sustained its production. The contract signing was scheduled for the following afternoon, in a formal ceremony that would include local representatives and agricultural sector authorities. However, that same night, while the family discreetly celebrated the success of the inspection, disturbing news arrived. Javier Ortega had called a press conference for the following morning, just before the signing ceremony. "It can't be a coincidence," Caroline observed with concern. "He must have something prepared to interfere with the contract. Has he found some way to question the documents we presented?" Matthew wondered. "I doubt it," Eleanor replied. "Our lawyers confirmed their authenticity beyond any reasonable doubt. It must be another strategy." Gabriela remained silent, reflecting on Javier's possible tactics and how to counter them. Finally, she spoke. "I think we should get ahead of any maneuver, invite the press to the estate tomorrow morning, before his conference, and formally announce both the contract with the Japanese and the new cooperative model." "Expose ourselves like that without knowing what Javier is planning?" Matthew questioned, skeptical. "Precisely because we don't know what he's planning, our best defense is transparency," Gabriela argued. "Present our vision, our achievements, and our plans with confidence and openness. Any subsequent accusations or insinuations will seem like a petty reaction to a positive project for the entire community." The proposal generated intense debate, with divided opinions on the strategy to follow. Finally, it was Eleanor who made the decision. "Gabriela is right," she declared with the authority only she could exert in that house. "The Vances don't hide or act defensively. We will present our project with pride, even inviting representatives from other estates, including Paradise, to participate in a constructive dialogue about the future of coffee in our region." The following morning dawned with unusual activity at Hopewell Estate. Local and regional journalists, urgently summoned but intrigued by the promise of a significant announcement, began to arrive early. Indigenous representatives, workers of all levels, and of course the Japanese delegation gathered in the main courtyard, decorated for the occasion with local flowers and symbols of both coffee tradition and indigenous culture. Eleanor, splendid in a modernized traditional dress, began the event with a short but powerful speech about the history of Hopewell Estate and its vision for the future. Then she gave the floor to Matthew, who presented the technical and commercial aspects of the agreement with the Japanese buyers, highlighting how it recognized and valued the estate's exceptional quality and sustainable practices. Caroline spoke next, explaining the innovations in production and processing that had allowed them to improve both the quality of the coffee and working conditions. Her usually technical presentation this time included emotional elements about the importance of the community in collective success. Finally, it was Gabriela's turn. Dressed simply but projecting calm confidence, she took the microphone as the gaze of everyone present focused on her, the newcomer who had catalyzed unexpected transformations. "My name is Gabriela Montero," she began, her clear voice resonating in the courtyard. "Many of you already know my story. I am Anthony Vance's daughter, and for years I lived disconnected from this part of my family heritage. When I arrived at Hopewell Estate just a few weeks ago, I did so seeking answers about my past. What I found was much more valuable: a future to be built." With simple but emotive words, Gabriela explained the renewed cooperative model they would implement in the West sector, not as a charitable concession, but as a strategic alliance that would benefit both the estate and the indigenous community, recovering ancestral practices while incorporating modern innovations. "This model honors my father's original vision," she continued, "but goes further, adapting to the realities and opportunities of the present. It's not mere nostalgia for what could have been, but determination to create what must be, a production that respects both the land and those who work it." When she concluded her presentation, she invited Manuel Gomez to join her on the podium. The old man, excited but dignified, spoke briefly in Indigenous and then in Spanish about the meaning of this rebirth for his community and for future generations. "The wisdom of our ancestors and the innovations of our young people united in one project," Manuel declared. "This is how the coffee from these lands will reach its full potential." The event culminated with the symbolic signing of the cooperative agreement and the contract with the Japanese buyers, amid applause and evident signs of approval from those present. The journalists, who had arrived expecting a routine announcement, found themselves covering a story of community renewal, business innovation, and family reconciliation that promised to resonate beyond the limits of Savannah. The ceremony had barely concluded when the news arrived. Javier Ortega had cancelled his press conference without public explanation. Whatever his strategy, the Vance's initiative had neutralized it before it could be deployed.
That afternoon, as the estate gradually returned to its normal rhythm after the morning success, I found Gabriela contemplating the last rays of sunbeam. It's an golden glow creating an almost dreamlike image of the land that now represented both the best and the today you honored you for this for 7 years so that no comment as I heard.
Anthony would be proud. It's our shared legacy, Gabriela replied sincerely. It wouldn't have been possible without the work that you, Matthew, and Caroline have maintained all these years. The ensuing silence was charged with unexpressed but understood emotions. Mutual recognition, earned respect, and perhaps most significantly, the complete acceptance of Gabriela into the family that had been denied to her for so long. "Will you stay?" Eleanor finally asked, formulating the question that had been floating unspoken since Gabriela's arrival. There's a lot of work to be done to fully implement the cooperative model. Gabriela contemplated the coffee plantations once more before answering. "I have commitments in New Orleans that I must attend to," she finally replied. "Projects that I can't abandon abruptly." Eleanor nodded, understanding but visibly disappointed. "But," Gabriela continued, "I could divide my time, alternate periods here and there at least during the first year of implementation, and after that we'll see what path my life takes." Eleanor's smile expressed more than any words. It wasn't the perfect answer, but it was honest and opened possibilities for a continuing relationship that was only beginning to blossom. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, both women remained silent, united by the contemplation of that land which, like themselves, had faced trials and transformations, but continued to produce valuable fruits when given the proper care. 3 months after signing the agreement with the Japanese, Hopewell Estate vibrated with the energy characteristic of harvest season. Workers moved among the coffee plants with the skill that only experience provides, carefully selecting the fruits at their optimal point of ripeness. The sweet, earthy aroma of fresh coffee permeated the air, mingling with traditional indigenous songs that had returned to the fields as part of the cultural revitalization promoted by the new cooperative model. Gabriela, true to her commitment, had divided the last few months between her projects in New Orleans and the implementation of the program in the west sector of the estate. Her intermittent but constant presence had generated a particular dynamic. Periods of her absence became opportunities for local project members to assume greater responsibilities, while her returns brought fresh perspectives and solutions to emerging challenges. This morning, fresh from a week in New Orleans, she toured the fields with Caroline, evaluating the quality of the first harvest under the new system. "The preliminary results are exceptional," Caroline commented, showing her the lab analyses on her tablet, "especially in the plots where we implemented the shade rotation you suggested. Higher concentration of sugars and complex acids, exactly the profile the Japanese are looking for, and all while maintaining full organic certification," Gabriela added with satisfaction, observing how a group of young indigenous people applied traditional harvesting techniques that minimize damage to the plants. "How's the special processing training going?" "Better than expected. Manuel has proven to be an extraordinary teacher. He's transmitting knowledge we thought was lost about controlled fermentation." Caroline spoke with an enthusiasm that would have been unthinkable months ago when referring to traditional practices. "We've adapted part of the wet process to incorporate these methods." The transformation in Caroline had perhaps been the most surprising of all. The initially skeptical manager had discovered in the cooperative project a renewed source of professional purpose. Her technical rigor, combined with a growing openness to traditional knowledge, had made her a crucial bridge between the estate's conventional methods and the recovered ancestral practices. "And Matthew, any news about Paradise Estate's response?" Gabriela asked as they headed towards a section where new coffee plants were growing under an agroforestry system inspired by indigenous practices. "Surprisingly, there's been a change in attitude," Caroline replied. "After they withdrew the lawsuit over the stream, we expected new confrontation strategies. Instead, Javier has kept a low profile. And the most interesting thing, Ricardo, his nephew, requested a visit to see our biofiltration system. Ricardo Ortega, Isabel's husband, the same. According to Isabel, who continues to maintain friendly contact with us, there's a faction within the Ortega family that favors more sustainable practices. Apparently, our success with the Japanese certification has made an impression. That information was promising. The rivalry between estates had been a constant source of tension, consuming energy that could be directed towards productive improvements. A shift towards more constructive competition, or even eventual collaboration on environmental issues, would represent a regional benefit. In the late afternoon, while supervising the arrival of the last baskets of harvested coffee at the processing area, Gabriela received an unexpected message. Eleanor requested her presence at the main house for a family meeting. The tone of the message suggested an important matter, but not urgent or problematic. When she arrived at the library, she found not only Eleanor, Matthew, and Caroline, but also Manuel Gomez and two younger representatives of the indigenous community, along with the family lawyer. Everyone looked serene but expectant. "Gabriela," Eleanor began after the initial greetings, "we've called you to discuss a proposal we've been considering during your absence. Something we believe would honor the progress made and ensure its continuity." Matthew took the floor, exhibiting the formal tone he adopted for matters of particular importance. "The success of the cooperative model in the West sector has exceeded our expectations, not only in terms of product quality but also in social and environmental benefits. The Japanese buyers are willing to pay a significant premium for this coffee with history and tangible values, just as you predicted. And other markets have started to show similar interest," Caroline added. "We've received inquiries from European and American buyers specifically interested in the coffee produced under this system. What we propose," Eleanor continued, "is to formalize and expand the model through a partial legal restructuring of Hopewell Estate." The lawyer spread documents across the table, organizational diagrams, financial projections, and what appeared to be a draft of bylaws. Hopewell Estate would maintain 51% ownership of the West sector, while the remaining 49% would be distributed among the participating indigenous members, with mechanisms for the gradual incorporation of new members. "A shared governance structure," Matthew continued, "with a board of directors where both the estate and the community would have equal representation regardless of ownership percentages. And a profit reinvestment program," Caroline added, "for education, technical improvements, and the gradual expansion of the model to other sections of the estate, as its viability is consistently demonstrated." Gabriela listened with growing astonishment. "Creation of a formally constituted cooperative entity," he explained, pointing to the documents. What her relatives were proposing went beyond what she herself had imagined possible in such a short time. Not simple operational adjustments, but a structural transformation that would institutionalize the principles of the cooperative model. "It's ambitious," she finally commented, studying the documents with professional attention. "Are you sure you're ready for this level of change?" "It was my idea initially," Matthew confessed, surprising Gabriela. "After seeing the results of the first quarter, it became clear that the long-term potential justifies the restructuring. It's both ethically and strategically sound." "The numbers support it," Caroline added. "Higher productivity, better quality, optimized operating costs thanks to adapted traditional practices, and access to premium markets that value the complete story behind the product." Eleanor, who had silently observed Gabriela's reactions, intervened with a more personal perspective. "When Anthony tried to implement something similar 3 decades ago, the business world wasn't ready. Markets didn't value what they now call sustainability and fair trade. Financial institutions didn't understand models that didn't maximize immediate profits. Today, the landscape is different, and we have the opportunity to complete what he visionarily began." Manuel Gomez, who had remained respectfully silent, then spoke with the gravity that his position as community leader conferred upon him. "Our people have consulted internally, Miss Gabriela. There is natural skepticism, based on past experiences, but also genuine hope. They believe that this time it can be different, especially with you involved as a bridge between both worlds." The proposal had clearly been carefully developed during Gabriela's weeks of absence. Every technical, legal, and financial aspect seemed meticulously considered, but there was a fundamental question that had not yet been explicitly addressed. "What role do you envision for me in this new structure?" she finally asked. Eleanor exchanged glances with her children before answering. "We would like you to assume the executive directorship of the cooperative, Gabriela." No one has the combination of technical expertise, cultural understanding, and personal connection to the original vision that you possess. The proposal was as unexpected as it was significant. It wasn't simply a professional role, but a long-term commitment to Hopewell Estate and, by extension, to the Vance family. "I understand you have commitments in New Orleans," Eleanor continued, anticipating the main objection. "The proposed structure would allow initial flexibility, with partial presence here, while you gradually transition your responsibilities there. But eventually it would require your permanent establishment in Savannah." The room fell silent as Gabriella processed the magnitude of what was proposed. When she arrived at Hopewell Estate months ago, she was primarily seeking answers about her past, a connection with the father she had barely known. What she was finding now was an invitation to build a future, to establish permanent roots in a land and a family that had initially received her with reservations. "I need time to consider it properly," she finally replied. "It's a decision that would affect many lives, including mine, in fundamental ways." "Of course," Eleanor nodded understandingly. "Take the time you need. The documents are available for your detailed review, and we're open to adjustments based on your observations." The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with agreements to resume the discussion in a week. As the others left, Matthew remained briefly, approaching Gabriella with an unusually vulnerable expression. "I know my initial reception was less than welcoming," he commented with evident discomfort, "but I hope you'll seriously consider staying, not just for the project, which clearly needs you, but because, well, you've brought something to the estate that was sorely needed, a connection to values we had begun to forget." That acknowledgement, coming from the initially skeptical Matthew, confirmed the magnitude of the transformation that had occurred in a few months. It wasn't simply a change in agricultural practices or business structures, but a deeper evolution in family and community relationships. That night, Gabriella remained for a long time on the terrace, contemplating the coffee plantations illuminated by the moon. The proposal generated contradictory emotions: enthusiasm for the opportunity to consolidate a significant project, unease about abandoning the work built over years in New Orleans, satisfaction at the implicit recognition of her professional and personal value, and a subtle fear at the idea of permanently committing to a place and a family where her belonging still felt, at times, tentative. Among her reflections, she recalled passages from Anthony's diary that acquired new relevance in this light, entries where her father described the tension between different loyalties, the desire to reconcile separate worlds, the impossibility of being fully present in both simultaneously. It seemed that life was presenting her, in a different form, some of the same dilemmas that Anthony had faced. The crucial difference, Gabriella realized as she returned to her room late at night, was that she had the opportunity to choose integrity over fragmentation, complete presence over unsustainable divisions. Whatever her final decision, she would make it with full awareness of its implications and possibilities. The following days passed in a balance between the daily responsibilities of the harvest and deep personal reflection. Gabriella dedicated time to touring each section of the estate, conversing not only with supervisors and technicians, but also with workers of all levels. She visited indigenous families in their homes, listening to perspectives on their shared past and hopes for the future. And in the evenings, she meticulously reviewed the proposed documents, noting observations and suggestions that reflected both her professional expertise and her growing understanding of the local dynamics. One particularly significant afternoon she spent with Eleanor, who had invited her to accompany her on her weekly tour of the main house gardens. As they walked among carefully pruned rose bushes and lush bougainvilleas, the conversation naturally turned to personal matters. "I never imagined that Remedios's daughter could become an essential part of Hopewell Estate," Eleanor confessed as they stopped by a centuries-old fountain. "When I received your initial letter, my greatest fear was that you would come seeking revenge or compensation for years of separation." "And my fear," Gabriella replied with equal honesty, "was to find rejection or worse, indifference, to discover that my father simply hadn't considered me important." "Anthony loved you," Eleanor affirmed with conviction, "in his complicated and divided way, but genuinely. In his last years, he spoke several times about looking for you, about trying somehow to integrate his two worlds." "What stopped him?" Eleanor sighed, contemplating the water flowing gently in the fountain. "Fear, probably, of the social consequences, of family rejection, of disrupting the delicate balance we had all built after difficult years. And then, when he finally seemed determined to act, illness surprised him. That acknowledgement of the human complexities behind decisions that had shaped entire lives created a moment of deep connection between the two women. It wasn't simply the assigning of blame or retrospective justifications, but empathetic understanding of the limitations and contradictions we all face. If you decide to stay, Eleanor continued after a moment of contemplative silence, it won't simply be to complete Anthony's unfinished project. It will be because you've found your own purpose here, your own place. That's what I hope for you, regardless of what you choose. The wisdom in those words accompanied Gabriella during the remaining days of deliberation. When the morning finally arrived to communicate her decision, she had achieved a clarity that transcended professional calculations or practical considerations. The family gathered again in the library, along with Manuel and the indigenous representatives. The lawyer presented the revised version of the documents, incorporating some of the suggestions Gabriella had proposed during the week. Greater specificity in the mechanisms for incorporating new community members, additional protections for traditional cultural practices, and an educational program that would guarantee the transmission of both technical and ancestral knowledge to new generations. When all the formal aspects were covered, all eyes converged on Gabriella, awaiting her response to the proposal to assume the executive directorship of the new cooperative. "I have considered this decision from multiple perspectives," she began, aware of the weight of each word. "Professionally, it represents an extraordinary opportunity to implement on a significant scale principles I have always defended. Personally, it means reconnecting with a family legacy that was denied to me for decades." She paused, observing the expectant faces around her before continuing. "But more importantly, it represents the possibility of transforming a story of division into one of integration, of honoring both the indigenous roots of this land and the vision of those who, like my father, tried to build bridges between seemingly separate worlds." Her gaze briefly rested on each person present. Eleanor, with her serene dignity that hid an indomitable strength. Matthew, whose pragmatism had expanded to incorporate broader values. Caroline, whose technical precision now served a more integral vision. Manuel, whose traditional wisdom found new avenues of expression. The young, indigenous people, who represented a future where tradition and innovation could coexist harmoniously. "I accept the position," she finally declared, "with the commitment to serve both the economic prosperity of the estate and the integral well-being of the community that sustains it. It won't be an easy path, but I'm convinced that together we can create something exceptional, a model that inspires beyond our limits." The formalization of the agreements proceeded with the solemnity appropriate for decisions that would affect future generations. Signatures were exchanged, commitments verbalized, projections shared, but more significant than the legal documents was the spirit of genuine collaboration that permeated the room, an improbable coalition united by a shared vision. When the meeting concluded, as the others left amidst lively conversations about next steps, Eleanor remained for a moment longer with Gabriella. Without words, she extended a small object she took from her dress pocket, the family locket that Gabriella had brought on her first visit, now set in a new fine silver chain. "This belongs to both your past and your future," she said simply, placing it in Gabriella's hands. "Just like you, now you belong completely to both." That simple yet meaningful gesture sealed a reconciliation that transcended legal documents or formal agreements. It was the final recognition that broken circles could be completed, interrupted stories could find continuity, and fragmented legacies could be reintegrated into more complete and hopeful narratives. A year had passed since the formalization of the Hopewell Cooperative. On the morning the estate's centennial celebration began, Gabriella contemplated the preparations from the terrace with a mixture of satisfaction and astonishment at the journey traveled. The central courtyard buzzed with activity as workers and members of the indigenous community collaborated on the final arrangements. Garlands of multicolored flowers, intertwined with coffee leaves, adorned the corridors. Long tables covered with hand-embroidered tablecloths were strategically placed under jacaranda trees in bloom. A photographic exhibition traced the estate's century-long history, with special emphasis on the last year of cooperative transformation. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee mingled with that of traditional dishes prepared by indigenous women, in the open kitchen set up for the occasion. Visitors were already beginning to arrive. International buyers, government representatives, families from neighboring communities, journalists specializing in sustainable agriculture, and of course, other producing families from the region, including to the surprise of Manya delegation led by Ricardo Ortega from Paradise Estate. Incredible how everything has changed in a year, isn't it? Caroline's voice interrupted her reflections as she joined her on the terrace. The last harvest not only exceeded our quality projections, but also quantity. And most importantly, Gabriela added, the equitable distribution of profits has begun to show tangible impacts on the community. It was true. The cooperative model had allowed indigenous families to improve their homes, send young people to study at regional universities with community return programs, and establish complementary small businesses that diversified the local economy. The renovated school now offered bilingual education, integrating traditional knowledge with modern science, and the community health center combined traditional medicine with contemporary care. "Where's Matthew?" Gabriela asked, noticing her stepbrother's unusual absence on such a significant morning. "He went to pick up the Japanese representatives at the airport," Caroline replied. "Apparently, they're bringing a proposal to expand the original contract. The cooperative model has generated so much interest in their market that they want exclusivity for the West Sector's harvest. We'll have to consult with the full council," Gabriela reflected. "Diversifying buyers gives us stability, but a deeper relationship with partners who truly value the entire process also has its advantages." The dynamic between the two women reflected the evolution of their relationship over the past year. From initial suspicion, they had moved to mutual professional respect that gradually transformed into true friendship. Caroline, with her analytical mind and meticulous attention to operational details, perfectly complemented Gabriela's integrative vision and intercultural perspective. "By the way," Caroline continued as they watched more guests arrive, "Manuel asked if you could meet briefly with him before the official ceremony. He seems to have something important to tell you." Gabriela found the old man in the place that had become significant for both of them, the ancestral stone circle on the hill in the West Sector. Manuel was accompanied by two young indigenous people whom Gabriela recognized as university students of agronomy, part of the training program the cooperative had established to ensure generational continuity. "Welcome, Director," Manuel greeted with a smile that lit up his face, lined by decades of sun and experience. "On a day like this, it's important to honor both the past and the future." The young people respectfully presented Gabriela with a box carved from colorful wood, the tree considered sacred in indigenous tradition. Upon opening it, she found a finely woven textile with symbols representing agricultural cycles, natural elements, and abstract concepts of balance and regeneration. "It's a textual map," Manuel explained. "Our grandmothers wove them to record knowledge about the land, lunar cycles, and cultivation practices. This one was created especially for today, integrating traditional symbols with representations of the innovations implemented this year. A living testament to how past and present can nourish a shared future." Emotion choked Gabriela's throat as she caressed the textile, recognizing the deep honor this gift represented. "It will be permanently displayed in the council room," she decided, "as a constant reminder of the wisdom that underpins our joint work." Back at the main house, the festive atmosphere had reached its peak. Eleanor, splendid in a traditional dress adapted with contemporary touches, received the guests with her characteristic elegance. At 70, her presence remained magnetic, although she had gradually delegated executive responsibilities to her children and Gabriela, assuming a more advisory but no less influential role. "There you are," she greeted Gabriela with genuine affection. "Matthew has just arrived with the Japanese. And look who else has come." Javier Ortega, apparently older since their last meeting, was approaching them accompanied by his nephew Ricardo and Ricardo's wife, Isabel. His expression combined discomfort and determination, like someone about to fulfill a difficult but necessary duty. "Eleanor Gabriela," he greeted formally, "congratulations on the centennial. A remarkable achievement for any family business." "Thank you for joining us, Javier," Eleanor replied with the equanimous courtesy she always maintained in public. "It's a day to celebrate not only the history of Hopewell Estate, but also the future we're building." The underlying tension was palpable, but so was a subtle shift in the dynamic between the two families. Ricardo, taking the initiative, addressed Gabriela directly. "The cooperative model you've implemented is generating important conversations throughout the region," he commented with genuine professional interest. "The results speak for themselves, both in product quality and community impact." "We're constantly learning," Gabriela replied modestly. "Each agricultural cycle brings new challenges and opportunities for adjustment." Precisely for that reason, Javier intervened with what seemed considerable effort. "Ricardo has insisted that we consider similar adaptations at Paradise Estate, at least as a pilot project in some sections." That admission, coming from the proud patriarch who had antagonized the Vances for decades, was surprising. Eleanor and Isabel exchanged glances of barely concealed astonishment. "We'd be happy to share our experience," Gabriela offered diplomatically. "The challenges we face as a region will be better addressed collectively than as isolated competitors." The conversation was interrupted by the announcement that the official ceremony was about to begin. As the attendees headed towards the central courtyard, Matthew discreetly reached Gabriela. "We have confirmation," he murmured, barely containing his enthusiasm. "The joint research project with the university has been approved. Full funding for the Regenerative Agricultural Practices Laboratory." This news represented another significant success for the cooperative, the creation of a research center that would scientifically document the effectiveness of traditional practices, combined with modern innovations, generating academic publications that could influence regional agricultural policies. The centennial ceremony began with a welcome in Spanish and Indigenous, followed by presentations on the estate's history and its recent evolution. Representatives from each sector, from field workers to specialized technicians and members of the board of directors, shared perspectives on the achievements of the previous year and visions for the future. When the time came for the main presentation, all eyes converged on the central podium where Eleanor, flanked by her 3 children, a family configuration that no one questioned anymore, shared personal and professional reflections. "100 years is just a whisper in the life of this land we tread upon," she began, her clear voice resonating in the silent courtyard. "The indigenous people cultivated these hills centuries before the first Vance dreamed of planting coffee plants here. And they will continue to do so long after our names are but faded memories." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the diverse faces that now constituted the extended community of Hopewell Estate. "What we celebrate today is not simply the longevity of a family business, but the resilience of a vision that has evolved over time. A vision that has known how to adapt, that has faced mistakes and learned from them, that has recognized that true strength lies in integration, not segregation." With a gesture, she invited Gabriela, Matthew, and Caroline to join her on the podium. The 3 advanced, presenting an image of unity that symbolized the estate's new era. "The future of Hopewell Estate now rests in younger and, I dare say, wiser hands," Eleanor continued. "Hands that understand that true and lasting success can only be built when it benefits everyone who contributes to it, when it respects the land that sustains it, and when it honors both ancestral knowledge and contemporary innovations." The ceremony culminated with the inauguration of a multi-purpose community space built with sustainable architecture techniques, the Anthony Vance Center for Integral Development, which would house educational, cultural, and productive programs for the entire region. "My father," Gabriela commented during the inauguration, "frequently spoke about circles that needed to be completed. I think that today, on this centennial, we can celebrate precisely that, the completeness of circles that for too long remained fragmented." The festivities continued until late at night. Traditional music alternated with contemporary interpretations. Food prepared according to centuries-old recipes was served alongside culinary innovations developed by young local chefs. Lively conversations in Spanish and Indigenous flowed freely between generations and diverse backgrounds. Late into the night, when most of the guests had left and only small groups were chatting quietly under the stars, Gabriela found a moment of quiet to escape to the coffee plantations. Following an impulse, she walked to the hill where a year ago she had met Manuel and where she had begun to truly understand her father's legacy. The full moon illuminated the coffee plants with a silvery glow, creating an almost dreamlike landscape. The silence was deep but alive, full of nocturnal whispers and subtle movements. Gabriela took the family locket, which she now constantly carried with her, from her pocket. "We did it, Dad," she murmured, feeling an intangible but comforting presence around her. "Not exactly as you imagined, perhaps better in some aspects, different in others, but the circle is complete." A soft rustling of leaves announced Eleanor's arrival, who slowly approached along the path. "I knew I'd find you here," she commented softly, joining Gabriella in her contemplation of the night landscape. Anthony also came to this hill at significant moments. He said that from here he could see both the past and the future of the estate. They remained in shared silence for several minutes, each absorbed in their own reflections, but united by an understanding that transcended words. "Do you know what I've learned this year?" Gabriella finally said. "That true legacy is not in the land, nor in the buildings, nor even in the name. It's in the values we transmit, in the lives we touch, in the balances we restore." Eleanor nodded, gently taking Gabriella's hand where the family locket rested. "When you arrived, I feared you were coming to claim a part of the past," she confessed. "I didn't understand that you were actually bringing an essential piece of the future." As they walked back together towards the illuminated house, where music and laughter still floated in the night air, Gabriella felt a deep certainty. Her journey had begun seeking answers about her origin, about an absent father and a denied legacy. What she had found was much more valuable, not only roots that anchored her to a reconciled past, but also branches that extended towards a future of renewed possibilities. Like the coffee plants that flourished under the shared care of ancient traditions and innovative practices, the story of Hopewell Estate would continue to evolve. And in that evolution, the painful divisions of the past would gradually transform into the rich diversity that nourishes the sweetest and most enduring fruits. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you enjoy it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video playing on your screen. This story will impact you. Until next time.